Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Lurker. Thank you for your continued support. I truly appreciate each and every one of you for being here. If you enjoy tonight's story, please consider leaving a comment and sharing your thoughts. Your feedback means a great deal and helps support the channel. Now sit back, relax, and let's begin tonight's park ranger story. People think the worst day of my life was the fire. It wasn't. The fire took 4 people a family in a rented cabin on a dry August night when the power line above their road should have been replaced a decade earlier. I'm a fire origin investigator, or I was, and I did my job the way I always did it. I walked the burn. I read the char. I followed the heat back to where it started. And it started exactly where I said it did. A failed line owned by a company that had cut its maintenance budget 3 years running. I had photographs. I had melt patterns. I had the maintenance records they thought they'd buried. I had everything a person could possibly need to prove a true thing. It didn't matter. The report that went public wasn't mine. Mine got revised, then softened, then shelved. And somewhere in that process, the cause became undetermined. And somewhere after that, it became my fault sloppy work, the lawyers said. A contaminated scene. An investigator with an agenda. The company kept its contracts. I lost my license, my marriage, and the only thing I'd ever really had, which was my name on a finding people could trust. So no, the worst day wasn't the fire. The worst day was the morning I understood that being right is worth nothing if the world decides not to believe you. That a truth no one will look at isn't a truth at all. It's just a weight you carry alone. I spent 10 years carrying it. 10 years of jobs that didn't last, rooms that got smaller, a phone that stopped ringing. I stopped telling people what I used to do, because the moment I did, I watched their faces change. I want you to understand who I was when the offer came, because everything that happened on that mountain happened because of it. I was a man who would do anything to be believed. That was the crack they reached through. I just didn't know yet that something was already reaching. The email came in on a gray Tuesday, in an inbox that mostly collected nothing. It was from a regional forestry office I'd never heard of, about a winter caretaker position at a remote ranger station in the southern Blue Ridge. Low pay. Total isolation. October through spring thaw. The kind of job they only offer to people who have run out of better options, which described me to the letter. What caught me wasn't the pay. It was how little they wanted to know. No mention of references. No request for the license I no longer had. Just a line that said, prior outdoor or investigative experience preferred. As if someone had read my whole ruined history and decided it was a recommendation instead of a disqualification. I should have found that strange. I did find it strange, but I'd spent a decade being treated like something people scraped off their shoe. And here was an offer that didn't seem to care what I'd been accused of. And a person gets hungry enough that hunger starts to look like instinct. I read the listing 4 times. And on the 4th read, the old part of me, the part I thought the fire had burned out, woke up at one phrase near the bottom. Position open due to previous caretaker no longer being with the program. No longer with the program. Not retired. Not relocated. Not promoted. That careful, bloodless phrasing investigators use when they don't want to say what actually happened. I'd written sentences like that myself to keep families from reading the truth in a report before I was ready to deliver it gently. I sat with my cold coffee and felt something I hadn't felt in 10 years. Not hope, exactly. Curiosity. The pull of a thing that didn't add up. A man no longer with a program. A job no one wanted. A forest at the end of a road. I told myself I was taking it for the silence and the paycheck. I replied that night. 2 days later, a man named Coy Esmond called to tell me how to drive up to Sable Ridge. Coy Esmond had a voice like a porch in summer. So, warm, in no particular hurry to get anywhere. He told me he was the district ranger, 31 years in, 18 months from a pension he clearly intended to enjoy. He walked me through the practical shape of the job. The station sat on a high bald above the Sable Ridge wilderness, reachable by one forest road that iced shut after the first hard freeze, which meant once I was up, I was up. I'd keep weather logs and check the trail register. I'd maintain a boundary line. He said it just like that. The boundary line. Like I'd know what he meant. I'd run a generator and feed a wood stove and talk to him on a hand crank radio once a week. It's quiet work, he said. Mostly. You'll be alone with your own head a lot. Some folks can't take that. I've gotten good at my own head, I said. He laughed, but it trailed off too soon. There's one thing, he said. The station runs on a few standing rules. Old ones. You follow them exactly, not most of them. All of them. Every day. I'll go over them when you're up. But I need to know now. You're the kind of man who can follow a rule he doesn't understand. It was such a small thing to ask. It should have been nothing. I can follow rules, I said. Then, because the investigator never really dies. What happened to the last caretaker? The warmth went out of his voice for exactly 1 second. 1 second is a long time on a phone. We'll talk when you're up, Coy said. I let it sit until the end of the call. Then I asked again. I've learned people answer a second time what they dodged the first time, if you wait. The last caretaker, I said. I'd feel better knowing what I'm walking into. Coy was quiet long enough that I checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. His name was Wade Sumner, he finally said. Good man. Careful man, mostly. He stopped following the rules one winter, and one night he walked off the bald and didn't come back. We searched a week. Never found him. No body. Nothing. I'd interviewed enough people to hear the shape of what's missing in an answer. There was no theory in it. No, we think he got disoriented. No, the weather turned. No, he must have slipped into a ravine. A trained outdoorsman vanishes from his own station, and the district ranger has no theory at all? That's not grief. Grief comes with stories. This was something else. This was a man who knew exactly what happened and had decided never to say it. And one more thing, the thing that hooked me deepest. Coy didn't sound sad about Wade. He sounded afraid of him, of something Wade had done. Stopped following the rules? How? I asked. "We'll talk when you're up," Coy said again. And this time, it was final. I should have heard a warning. Instead, I heard a story, the first real story I'd smelled in 10 years. And the worst part of me leaned toward it. A man who broke a rule worth breaking. Maybe a truth somebody had buried. I knew that smell. I'd been buried under one myself. I took the job harder after that, for all the wrong reasons. I packed over the next week, and the whole time a question kept surfacing that I kept pushing back under. Why me? I'd spent 10 years unhireable. People did not call me with jobs. They did not overlook a destroyed career and a revoked license and a name that turned up wrong things when you searched it. And yet, here was a government program handing me keys to a remote post and asking me almost nothing, as if my disgrace were invisible to them or worse, as if it were the point. Any good investigator knows that when something is too easy, you're not lucky. You're being used. You just haven't found the angle yet. I pushed it down. I told myself a man with nothing doesn't get to interrogate a gift. I packed wool and boots and a good knife and batteries. And I packed my camera. It was an old field camera, the one from my old life, the tool I'd used to document 100 burns and prove a dozen truths nobody wanted proven. I hadn't used it in years. It belonged to a man who no longer existed. There was no professional reason on earth to bring it to a winter caretaker job, feeding a wood stove on a mountain. I told myself it was habit, sentiment, a way of bringing the only version of myself I'd ever liked. I wrapped it in a shirt and put it at the bottom of my bag, and I felt, doing it, the faint discomfort of a man lying to himself and choosing not to notice. I didn't know yet that I was packing the exact instrument the mountain had been waiting a decade for someone to bring. I didn't know that whatever was up there could not get what it wanted from Coy, or from anyone who believed the rules, only from a man who believed in proof. I drove north the next morning, into the Blue Ridge, up a road that kept getting smaller. The forest road climbed for 2 hours, and somewhere in the second hour, it stopped feeling like travel and started feeling like swallowing. The rhododendron came in close on both sides, green walls of it, taller than the truck, branches woven so tight you couldn't see 3 feet into them. Coy had a name for these thickets when I asked him later. Laurel Hells. He said it without irony. He said people who walked off-trail into them in fog sometimes never found their way back out, that searchers had stood 10 feet from lost hikers and not seen them, that the Laurel Hells were where most of the regions missing went missing. I believed it, just looking at the stuff. It wasn't a forest you walked through. It was a forest that decided whether to let you. Then the trees fell away all at once, and I came out onto Gallows Bald. It was a grassy dome at the top of the world, open and pale gold with frost-killed grass, floating on a sea of cloud that filled every valley below it. Beautiful. Genuinely, breath-stealing beautiful. The kind of place you'd put on a postcard. And completely, perfectly silent. No birds, no wind in trees, because there were no trees. Just the hush of high, open ground, and a small cluster of weathered buildings at the far edge. The silence was the first thing that wasn't right. I'd worked wilderness. Wilderness is never quiet. It's full of small life, making small sounds. This was the silence of a held breath. A man was standing by the station, watching me come. And the first thing he did, before he said a word of greeting, was raise a hand for me to wait, and walk me not to the cabin, but out along the edge of the bald, to a line of stones in the grass. Coy Esmond was lean and weathered, with a white mustache and eyes that had spent 30 years reading weather and people. He shook my hand, looked at my boots, and then said, "Walk with me before the light goes. I want to show you the most important thing first." The most important thing was a line of rocks. They ran along the ridge as far as I could see, in both directions, fist-sized and head-sized stones, set in the grass in a single continuous row, weathered and lichen-spotted, and obviously old. A survey line, Coy said. 1850s, when they first ran the boundary through this country. The station had maintained it ever since. I waited for the part that made it the most important thing. He crouched and gently pushed one stone that had rolled a few inches back into its place in the row, settling it like you'd settle a sleeping child. "You walk this line at first light and last light every day," he said. "Any stone that's shifted, you put it back exactly. You never add a stone. You never take one away. That's rule 1. I looked at a row of rocks in the grass and felt the strangeness of a man treating it like the wall of a prison. "Boundary of what?" I asked. "There's nothing on the other side, but more bald." Coy stood, brushed the dirt off his hands, and didn't answer. He just looked across the line at the empty grass and the cloud beyond it, with an expression I'd later understand, and at the time only filed away. The look of a man checking that a door is still shut. On the way back, he stopped at a small fenced plot on a low knoll inside the line. A cemetery, old, maybe 12 hand-cut stones leaning at soft angles in the grass. "The men who first surveyed the line," Coy said. "Some of them are up here." He walked the rows slowly, and I realized after a moment that his lips were moving. He was counting graves the way you'd count a kid's getting off a school bus, touching each one with his eyes, making sure none had wandered off. 31, he murmured, and something in his shoulders eased. "Is that the right number?" I asked. He looked at me like he'd forgotten I was there. "It's the number that's supposed to be," he said. "You'll learn why on your last night, not before. There's a rule for it." He steered me back toward the cabin with a hand on my shoulder, friendly and final. "The dead keep the line too, up here. Best thing you can do for them is leave them at 31. I didn't know what that meant. I told myself it was mountain superstition, the kind of thing old caretakers tell new ones to keep a tradition alive. But I noticed I'd stopped finding any of it quaint. The silence, the line, the counted dead, none of it felt like folklore. It felt like procedure, like a system someone serious had built for a serious reason, and refined over a very long time. Inside, Coy poured 2 coffees, sat me down at a table with a worn wooden box and a thick pencil-written logbook on it, and said it was time I learned all 6. He started with the parts a sane man could explain. He showed me the generator and the fuel, the wood stove and the dry wood, the hand crank radio, and the Sunday schedule. He showed me the trail register where day hikers signed in and out. And he showed me the logbook. And the thing that stopped me, the thing my whole old life snagged on, it was written in pencil. All of it. Decades of entries, and every one of them in pencil, and many of them half erased, ghost gray words, rubbed almost off the page. "We keep it in pencil," Coy said. "And we burn the whole thing every spring. I do it myself. New book every year. You'll help me burn this one when the thaw comes." He said it the way you'd explain any procedure, and then he looked at me to see if I'd argue. I didn't yet. But the investigator in me was already itching. You don't keep a record you intend to destroy. You don't write in a medium designed to be erased. A log exists to be permanent, to prove what happened, to protect the person who wrote it. A log you burn every spring isn't a record. It's the opposite of a record. It's a confession with a built-in match. "These rules," I said, "they're not superstition, are they?" "No," Coy said. He sat down heavy, suddenly looking every one of his 60-some years. They're the distilled deaths of everybody who learned them the hard way. 30 years I've kept this district. I've burned a lot of logs, and in all that time, only one caretaker ever broke a rule on purpose. He met my eyes. That was Wade. I asked the question I always ask, the one that's gotten me in trouble my whole life. What's the worst that happens if a rule breaks? Coy turned his coffee cup in his hands for a while. When he spoke, it was the strangest thing I have ever heard a government man say, and he said it plainly, like a weather report. "Up here," he said, "some things stay harmless only as long as nobody can prove they're real. The rules don't fight what's out there. You can't fight it. The rules just keep it deniable. Keep it a story instead of a fact. Keep it something a reasonable person can walk away from and forget." He looked at the pencil log between us. "That's why we write soft and burn it after. A thing that's only rumored stays small. A thing that's proven gets a place to stand." "That doesn't make sense," I said. "Proof doesn't create anything. It just records what's already there." "That's what Wade thought too," Coy said. He stood, settled his hat, and went to the door. The light outside had gone to the long gold of late afternoon, and I understood he meant to drive down before dark, the way everyone seemed to leave this place before dark. "You'll think I'm a crazy old man tonight," he said. "Read the rules. Walk the line at last light. By spring, you'll wish I had been crazy." He paused with his hand on the door. "Don't try to make sense of it, Holt. Men like you and me, that's the one thing that'll get us killed up here, trying to make sense of it." Then he was gone, and his truck shrank down the road into the Laurel, and the engine sound faded, and the great silence of the bald came back down over the station. And it was just me. I sat at the table, opened the file, and read the 6 rules for the first time. They were written at the front of the pencil log in a careful, old-fashioned hand, and I read them aloud to the empty cabin because something about them seemed to demand it. 1. Walk the boundary line at first light and last light. Replace any stone that is shifted. Never add a stone, never take one away. 2. Hikers who come off the bald after dark will ask you the time. Tell them the wrong time on purpose. The ones who correct you are not hikers. 3. The payphone in the equipment shed will ring. Let it ring 9 times and stop. If it rings a 10th time, lift the receiver off the hook and leave it off until morning. 4. Never make a permanent record of anything that crosses the line. No photographs, no recordings. The station log is kept in pencil and burned every spring. What is written down stays. 5. If you find your own handwriting in the log on a day you did not work, do not read it. Tear out that page and burn it alone. 6. On the last night of the season, count the graves in the surveyor's cemetery. If there are more than 31, find the new name before dawn. Say it aloud once, and never again. They read like real backcountry protocol, braided with something much older and much worse. Specific, practical, operational. The kind of rules you only write after the thing they prevent has already happened to somebody. I read them twice. Then I sat very still, because one of them had reached into my chest and closed a fist. Never make a permanent record of anything that crosses the line. No photographs, no recordings. The station log is kept in pencil and burned every spring. What is written down stays. I read it a third time, and a fourth, and the longer I looked at it, the more it felt like the rule had been written specifically for me, personally, by someone who knew exactly what I was. My whole life had been proof, photographs, documentation, evidence laid out so plainly that no one could look away from the truth. That was the work. That was the man I'd been before they took it from me, and the man I'd spent 10 years grieving. The single most sacred thing I knew how to do, gather the record that makes a true thing undeniable, was the one act this rule forbade, in capital letters, at the center of the list. What is written down stays. Not is kept safe. Not is preserved. Stays. As if writing a thing down didn't record it, but anchored it, pinned it here, made it permanent in some way that had nothing to do with paper. I thought about Coy's voice. A thing that's proven gets a place to stand. And then I thought the thought that was the beginning of everything, the thought I should have been afraid of, and instead felt a terrible, hungry interest in. If something up here could be proven really proven, on film, undeniable, then a man could finally show the world a truth it couldn't bury. A man could be believed. The fist in my chest wasn't fear. That was the problem. It was want. And then I noticed the writing under rule number 4. In the margin beside rule number 4, in a different hand, fast, hard-pressed, panicked, nothing like the careful script of the rules themselves, someone had written 4 words. Wade already broke this. Below it, half erased, rubbed almost to nothing, the way so many entries in this log had been rubbed away, was a date from the previous winter. And a single line I had to tilt toward the lamp to read. The photo is still out there. I sat back. The cabin ticked around me as the stove warmed it. Outside, the last light was going. So the previous caretaker hadn't just broken a rule and wandered off a mountain. He had broken this rule. Rule 4. The record rule. He had made a permanent record of something that crossed the line of photograph, and that photograph had never been destroyed. It was still out there, on this mountain, somewhere. Every instinct from my old life lit up at once. A hidden photograph. A man who vanished after taking it. A district ranger who was afraid not of what happened to Wade, but of what Wade did. This wasn't folklore. This was a case. This was evidence. Withheld. Waiting. I should have felt dread. Part of me did. But the larger part of me, the ruined, starving, 10 years disbelieved part, felt the closest thing to purpose I'd known since the fire. I closed the log. The rule said, walk the line at last light. And the last light was almost gone. So I pulled on my coat and went out to do it. That was when the first hikers came up out of the laurel, in the dark, and asked me the time. There were 2 of them, coming up the trail from the laurel hills as the last gray drained out of the sky. Ordinary. A man and a woman in good gear, headlamps off, moving easy. They lifted hands in greeting and asked if they could top off water before heading down, and I said, sure, and pointed them to the spigot, and we made the small, dead talk that strangers make on a mountain. They were friendly, they were normal. That's the part I keep coming back to. There was nothing wrong with them that I could see or hear or name. Then, as they shouldered their packs to go, the man glanced at the dark sky and asked, easy as anything, hey, you got the time? Rule 2 went off in my head. Tell them the wrong time on purpose. It was the most absurd thing in the world. I felt like a fool. But I'd promised Coy I'd follow rules I didn't understand. And a decade of being right and ignored had taught me something about humility. So I looked at my father's old habit of certainty, and I lied. 9:15, I said. It was a few minutes after 7. The woman nodded and turned to go. Ordinary. Done. The man stopped. He turned back to me, slow, and he smiled, and the smile was a beat too wide and held a beat too long. And he said, gently, like he was correcting a child he was fond of, no, it's 7:04. To the minute. He'd corrected me to the minute, in full dark, with no watch I could see, no phone in his hand. And he kept smiling at me, waiting, like he wanted to see what I'd do, now that we both knew he'd caught the lie. I did the only thing my body knew to do. I said goodnight, and I turned, and I walked back to the cabin at a normal pace, not running, because some animal part of me understood that running was an answer. And I did not want to give it an answer. And I went inside and bolted the door. When I looked back out the window, the trail was empty. Both of them gone. No headlamps moving down into the laurel. Just the empty grass and the dark. I stood there with my pulse moving up into my ears, trying to build a rational explanation. And I was still trying when the phone in the equipment shed started to ring. I hadn't even known the shed had a phone. An old payphone, Coy had said, mounted on the wall out there. No line that anyone had run in 50 years. Rule 3 sat in my chest as I counted the rings. 1, 2, 3. Sound carried thin across the cold to the cabin. 4, 5, 6. I gripped the edge of the table. 7, 8, 9. Silence. My breath went out of me. 9 rings, then stop, exactly as the rule said. I almost laughed. Then it rang again. The 10th ring. If it rings a 10th time, lift the receiver off the hook and leave it off until morning. I made myself go out into the cold dark, across the frozen grass to the shed, my flashlight beam shaking just slightly on the old black phone. And I lifted the receiver and set it down on the shelf beside it, off the hook, the way the rule said. And in the half-second the earpiece passed my ear, I heard a voice in it, faint, tinny, far away. It was the man from the trail, and he was telling me the time, correcting it, down to the second. I left the receiver hanging and walked back to the cabin and did not sleep that night. I want to be honest about what changed in me in those few hours, because it matters. I had come up that mountain a skeptic in the way all investigators are skeptics. Not closed-minded, but evidence-bound, unwilling to believe a thing until it proved itself. And in one evening, 2 rules had proven themselves in front of my own eyes and ears. The wrong time tell, the 10th ring, the voice in a dead phone. A reasonable man at that point gets afraid and stays afraid. And I was afraid. But underneath the fear, growing, was the other thing. Because if the rules were real, if all of this was real, then there was a real thing up here. A documentable thing. A thing that crossed a line and corrected the time and spoke through a phone with no line. And somewhere on this mountain was a photograph that proved at least part of it. Wade's photograph. The photo that was still out there. I lay awake, and I did the math I'd been doing my whole life, the investigator's math, the math that had cost me everything, and that I had never once managed to stop doing. If I could find that photo, or take a better one, I could prove this. All of it. And being right would finally matter. I didn't yet understand that this exact thought was the trap, that the mountain didn't need to break me with fear. It only needed to wait for a man who wanted proof. At first light, I went to walk the line, and I found that one of the missing had never left it. I checked the trail register at dawn out of habit, the investigator's habit of reconciling records, and the numbers didn't close. A hiker had signed in 4 days before I arrived. A woman, solo, day hike to the Bald and back. She'd signed in, she had never signed out. And when I drove the truck down to the little trailhead pull-off where the road met the Laurel, her car was still there, frosted over, 4 days of leaves on the windshield, the doors locked, a water bottle still in the cup holder. 4 days. A solo hiker, overdue 4 days, car still at the trailhead, and no search had been called, because there was no one up here to call it. Wade was gone. Coy was 18 months from his pension and 3 hours away. I was the only ranger on a mountain that had quietly swallowed a person. I did it right. I'm trained for this. SAR was part of my old life, too. I gridded the Laurel along the section of trail nearest the line. I called her name until my voice gave out. The laurel hells closed around me, green and silent and total. And I understood why searchers lost people 10 feet away in this stuff you couldn't see. You couldn't move. The whole world became a maze of wet branches that all looked the same. I found her phone near the boundary line. Just the phone, screen cracked, lying in the grass a few feet from the stones, as if she'd dropped it, reaching for something. No other sign of her. No pack, no jacket, no body. Just the phone. I shouldn't have been able to turn it on. The screen was shattered, and it had sat in the frost for days. But it lit when I pressed it, and the last thing she'd done, the last thing on it, was a photo she'd started to take. At the line, facing across it. The photo was corrupted, half-formed, a smear of grass and gray, and something at the edge of the frame that the cracked screen couldn't render, a shape my eye kept trying to resolve, and couldn't. The timestamp was 4 nights ago, the same night I'd realize later that the ring of laurel nearest the line had first started to brown and die. She'd tried to photograph something at the line, and then she was gone. No photographs. I stood there at the boundary with a dead woman's phone in my hand, and Rule 4 going through me like cold water. And I made myself look at the stones. Really look, the way I'd look at a burn scene. And on one of them, low, half hidden in lichen, were initials scratched into the rock. Crude, deliberate. W.S. Wade Sumner. He'd marked a stone. And when I worked my fingers down into the grass and the gap beneath that stone, I found something wedged there, dry, protected, hidden in the one place on the whole mountain no one ever disturbed, because the rule said, never move the stones. A film canister. Old. Plastic capped. The kind you'd get from a real camera. The kind I had at the bottom of my bag. Wade hadn't used a phone. He'd used film, like me, like the man I used to be. And he'd hidden his evidence in the boundary itself, under a stone no one was allowed to lift, marked with his own initials, so that someday someone who knew how to look would find it. My hands were not steady as I worked the canister free. I told myself I was preserving evidence, securing a scene, doing my job. I was lying. I knew the weight of a film canister in my palm and what it meant, and what I wanted to do with it. And it had nothing to do with my job. I pocketed it and went back inside, and that was when I found that Wade had left more than film. Tucked behind the wood stove flue, where the heat would keep it dry and no casual eye would find it, was a journal. Not the pencil log. A real one, in pen, permanent, against every instinct this station was built on. Wade Sumner had left a record on purpose, the way a man leaves a record when he's decided he isn't coming back. I read it in one sitting, and reading it was like reading my own diary, written in another man's hand. Wade had been a careful man, like Coy said. He'd kept the rules for 6 winters without complaint. And then, the 7th winter, he'd started to break. Not from carelessness, from conscience. People were going missing in the Laurel more than the records ever admitted, year after year, swallowed by a thing he could see crossing the line and could never tell a living soul about. Because the moment he said it out loud, he became a crazy man. And the moment he wrote it down permanently, he broke the one rule that mattered. I can't keep doing this, he'd written. I can't keep a secret that's killing people and call it a job. If I could just prove it, one photograph, one undeniable thing they'd have to send people. They'd have to close this place, fence it, study it, do something. One photograph could save every hiker who ever comes up this mountain again. I had to put the journal down, because that was me. That was exactly me, 10 years ago, standing over a burn with my camera, certain that the truth, once proven, would force the world to be just. Wade thought a photograph would save lives. He was wrong in a way I hadn't understood yet, but I was about to. The later entries changed. The handwriting got worse. The certainty curdled into horror. Wade had done it. One clear night he'd waited at the line, and the thing had crossed. He never described it plainly, and I came to understand that was its own kind of rule, that describing it fed it, and he'd photographed it. One frame. He'd developed it himself in the equipment shed, which I hadn't known was possible until I found the chemicals out there later. And he'd held in his hands the proof he'd wanted for 7 years. And that, he wrote, was when everything got worse. Before the photo, it was different every time, he wrote. A shape, a sound, a feeling, never the same twice. You could half believe you imagined it. After the photo developed, it stopped changing. It became one thing, consistent, real, like the picture told it what to be. And now, it has to be that. Every night. Exactly that. I gave it edges. I gave it a shape it can keep. God help me. I think I gave it a name. He'd understood, too late, what Coy had tried to tell me at the table. A thing that's only rumored stays small. A thing that's proven gets a place to stand. Recording it hadn't exposed it. Recording it had fixed it, nailed it into the world like a nail through cloth, permanent, anchored, growing outward from the point of proof. And Wade hadn't burned the photos. That was his last failure, and the most human one. He'd hidden them instead, in the stones, behind the flue, because even at the end, even understanding what he'd done, he couldn't bring himself to destroy the one thing that might someday make someone believe him. That hope was still up here, anchoring the breach, widening it every night. I closed the journal, and out at the line, in the last light, the thing Wade had named came to the stones, on schedule, and this time it did not ask me the time. It said my name. I was at the window when it came. I want to be careful here, because describing it is the thing Wade warned against, so I'll only tell you what it did, not what it was. It came to the line at last light and stood at the stones, on the far side, where there was nothing but empty bald, and it was the same shape 2 nights running now, which I understood was wrong, which I understood meant it had a photograph somewhere telling it what to be. Consistent. Fixed. Wade's nail through the cloth of the world. And it spoke. Not the wrong time game. Not the phone. It said my name, my full name, the one the newspapers had used, the one the lawyers had dragged through 10 years of mud. It said it the way you'd say the name of someone you'd been waiting a long time to meet. Then it offered me something. Not in words. In a kind of certainty that arrived whole in my chest, the way the corrected time had arrived in the dead phone. It knew what I was. It knew the shape of the wound I'd carried up that mountain. And it offered to fill it. Prove me was the shape of the offer. Photograph me. Take the undeniable thing back down to your world. Be believed. Be vindicated. Be right. Out loud, finally, where everyone can see. It had read me the way I read a burn. It knew the exact accelerant that would make me catch. My hand, I realized, was resting on the bag where my camera was. I didn't remember putting it there. I didn't sleep. Toward the gray hour, I went to the log to write the night's entry. The act steadied me, the procedure of it, and I found a page already filled. In my handwriting, dated the next day, a day I had not yet worked. Rule 5. If you find your own handwriting in the log on a day you did not work, do not read it. Tear out that page and burn it alone. Every part of my old life screamed at me to read it. A document, in my own hand, describing a day that hadn't happened. That was evidence. That was the future. That was the single most extraordinary piece of physical proof a man could ever hold. Not reading it went against every instinct I had ever trusted. But I had watched 4 rules prove themselves now, so I tore the page out, and I carried it to the stove, and I fed it into the fire. And as it curled and caught, the eye that had never in its life been able to not look, caught one word in my own handwriting before the flame took it. Developed. One word. Developed, as in film, as in a photograph brought into being, as in the thing the future me had written down doing. I had burned the page, but the words stayed in me like a splinter, because some part of me already knew it was a prophecy. And some part of me, the starving, ruined, 10 years disbelieved part, did not entirely want it to be wrong. By morning, the ring of dead laurel around the line was wider. I could see it from the cabin now, a circle of brown, dying rhododendron, spreading outward from the point on the boundary where Wade had taken his photo, where the woman had dropped her phone, where the thing now came every night, wearing the same fixed shape. The breach, growing. The nail working its way wider through the cloth. Exactly what Wade had described in his last horrified entries. And then a second car appeared at the trailhead, frosted, abandoned. Another register entry with no matching sign out. Another person walked into the laurel and not back out. It was not going to stop on its own. I understood that with the cold clarity I used to bring to a scene. This wasn't a haunting I could wait out till spring. It was a wound, and it was bleeding. And it was bleeding because of something permanent that existed up here Wade's photographs, the record that anchored the thing into the real. As long as those images existed, the breach would widen, and people would keep walking into the laurel and not coming out. Someone had to close it, and closing it meant finding and destroying every permanent record of the crossing that existed on this mountain. I radioed Coy on the off day, breaking the schedule, and when he answered, I could hear in his voice that he already knew what I was going to say. And then he told me the thing he should have told me before I ever drove up. The reason a disgraced man, a man no one would believe, had been the perfect and only choice for this post. I hired you because nobody believes you, Holt. He said it flat, over the static, and let it sit. Think about it, Coy went on, tired, almost gentle. The danger up there isn't that a caretaker sees something. They all see something, sooner or later. The danger is that a caretaker proves it, takes it down the mountain, makes the world look. Wade nearly did. Wade was a believable man, steady, credible, the kind of man people listened to. If he'd gotten that photo to the right desk, they'd have come up here with cameras and crews and 100 phones, and they'd have proven the thing into something none of us could ever contain again. I stood in the cold cabin and felt the floor of my own life tilt. So you wanted someone who couldn't, I said. I wanted the one man in a world who could witness all of it and never be able to make anyone believe him, Coy said. A man whose word is already worthless. A man who, if he ran down this mountain, screaming the truth, would just be the disgraced fire investigator, making up monsters for attention. You were perfect, Holt, the safest possible keeper, because the thing up there feeds on being proven, and you're a man nobody will ever let prove anything again. It was the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to me, and the kindest, and it was true. They'd taken the wound that destroyed my life and used it as a lock on a door. My disgrace wasn't a flaw they'd overlooked. It was the qualification. And the worst part, the part that frightened me about myself, was that I understood, in that moment, exactly how badly I wanted to prove them wrong. "Tell me how to close it," I said. "The breach, the dead laurel. Tell me how Wade's mistake gets undone." Coy was quiet a moment. Then he told me what the rules had been dancing around all along. The surveyors in the cemetery, the 31, were the line's anchors. The men who first walked the boundary and died keeping it, buried inside the line on purpose, their names holding the seam shut. 31 names, 31 graves, a fixed and balanced number. When the count held, the line held. A breach, he said, could only be closed one way, by burning every permanent record of the crossing, on the line itself, at the graves, before dawn. Fire and the boundary together. You unmade the proof where the dead could witness it unmade. And the thing lost the place to stand that the proof had given it, and it slid back into being only a rumor, small, deniable, contained. Wade had it in his hands, Coy said. All he had to do was burn the photos at the cemetery and walk away. Instead, he hid them. He couldn't let go of being believed. So the breach never closed, and one night, it took him. And the count? He stopped. The count what? Last spring, there were 32 graves, Coy said quietly. There's a stone up there now that wasn't there before, with a name on it I won't say. You understand what I'm telling you. It already took one keeper into the line. Don't be the second. He told me to gather every record Wade's film, the photos, the woman's phone, anything that proved the crossing, and burn it all at the graves before dawn. I said I would. I gathered everything, and I climbed to the cemetery at last light, and the thing came into the open and offered me the only deal that could have stopped me. I knelt at the graves, with everything spread on a flat stone. Wade's canisters, the developed prints I'd found behind the flue, the dead woman's cracked phone, and a can of fuel, and a lighter. All I had to do was burn it. The whole task was the simplest thing in the world. Strike a flame, end the breach, walk away. And then it came into the open, fully, the way it had never come before. Close, lit by the last of the light, the fixed shape Wade's photo had given it, standing inside the dead ring of laurel. And for the first time, it was undeniable, photographable, provable, right there in front of me, holding still, almost as if it were posing. 10 years rose up in me all at once. The buried report, the revoked license, the faces that changed when I said what I used to do, the 4 people I couldn't save and could never prove I'd tried to. Every room that got smaller, every phone that stopped ringing. A whole decade of being the liar instead of the one who told the truth. And here, finally, was a truth so large that one photograph would end the argument forever. One frame, kept safe, carried down. The world would have to look. The world would have to believe me. My camera was already in my hands. I don't fully remember lifting it. I told myself, one shot, just one, just insurance. I'd still burn the rest, and even as I told myself that I knew it was the same lie Wade told, the same lie the woman with the phone told, the same lie this mountain had been waiting a decade for me to tell. I broke Rule 4. The shutter clicked, The moment the shutter fired, the world lurched. The dead ring of laurel heaved outward all at once, a wave of browning and dying that rolled out from the line into the living forest. The thing in front of me sharpened, gained weight, became more solid and more certain, fed by the new proof I'd just made. And in the soft earth of the cemetery, between two old stones, the ground sank, a new depression, grave-shaped, opening like a held breath let out. The 32nd grave. Mine, if I let it. I understood what I'd done. I'd given the thing a fresh nail. And now, the only way to pull all the nails was the one I'd been told from the start. Burn every record. Every permanent record of the crossing. Which meant the photograph I'd just taken. The one in my hands. The undeniable thing. The proof. The vindication. The single image that could have given me back my name, my career, my whole stolen life, the thing I had wanted more than I'd wanted anything in 10 years. I stood at the graves with the fuel and the lighter and my whole future in one strip of film. And I had to choose. Keep the proof and be believed, and let the breach widen, and let the laurel take every hiker who ever came up this mountain again, or burn it. All of it, including my own perfect frame, and stay forever exactly what they'd hired me to be. The man nobody believes, a liar to the end. Right, and alone with it, like always. I thought of 4 names in a rented cabin. I thought of a woman's cracked phone in the frost. I poured the fuel. I burned all of it. Wade's canisters, the prints from behind the flue, the woman's phone, my own film still warm in the camera. I stripped it out and fed it into the flame and stood there in the cemetery while 10 years of want went up as smoke over the surveyors' graves. I burned the only proof I would ever have. I burned the thing that could have made the world finally look at me and say he was right. I watched it curl and blacken and become nothing. And I made myself watch, because some debts you have to witness yourself paying. The thing at the edge of the light thinned as the fire took the last of it, lost its edges, stopped being one fixed shape, and became, again, a thing you could half believe you imagined. It receded across the line, back into rumor, back into the deniable dark, until the bald was only a bald, and the laurel was only laurel, and the night was only night. At the gray edge of dawn, I walked the cemetery and counted the graves the way Coy had taught me, the way Rule 6 demanded. 31. The new depression had closed over. The count held, the breach was shut, the mountain was quiet. And I was exactly what they'd made me. The only witness to a truth I had just, with my own hands, made certain no one would ever believe. I had never in my life felt so emptied out. And underneath the emptiness, faint and strange and entirely mine, was something I hadn't felt since before the fire. I had done the right thing when no one was watching, and no one ever would. Spring came late and slow. The road thawed, and Coy drove up to burn the season's log with me, the way he'd said he would back in the fall. We fed the pencil book into the fire, page by page, and watched a winter of soft, erasable records become smoke. And for a while, neither of us said anything. Then Coy told me the thing that I think kept him up at night more than any monster. You closed it, he said. You did what Wade couldn't. But I won't lie to you, Holt. Gallows bald isn't the only line. There's others, all through this country, and others like it. And the rules that keep them, they were written for a world where proof was rare, where you needed a real camera and skill and intent to make a permanent record of anything. He stared into the flames. Now everybody's got a camera in their pocket. Every hiker, every kid, every fool who wanders off a trail. Every year, more crossings get recorded by accident, somewhere, by someone who doesn't even know what they caught. We can't burn what we don't know exists. The secret that keeps everyone safe is leaking, one frame at a time, faster than anyone can put it out. I understood then that what I'd done up here, the thing that cost me everything, was a single bucket against a tide. I'd closed one wound on one mountain, but the whole old system, secrecy, denial, the careful keeping of things unproven, was losing. And it was losing to the simplest thing in the world, to the fact that we now record everything, all the time, without thinking. Coy offered me the post again, next season, and the ones after, for as long as I wanted it. I took it. Not for the money, and not because I was trapped, and not because I'd made peace with being disbelieved. I took it because, for the first time in 10 years, I knew something true, and I was at peace not proving it. That's the thing the fire took from me, and the mountain gave back, in the strangest, hardest way. For a decade, I'd believed that a truth no one will look at isn't a truth at all, that being right is worthless if you can't make the world see it. And up there, kneeling at those graves with my own vindication burning in my hands, I'd learned the opposite. Some truths you keep not because you're forced to, but because keeping them is the whole of the job. Because the proof would cost more lives than the secret ever will. Because doing the right thing where no one can see you is not nothing. It might be the only thing that was ever really mine. So I stay. I walk the line at first light and last light. I replace the stones that shift, and I never add one and never take one away. I tell the wrong time to things that come up out of the laurel in the dark. And most nights, nothing comes, and the bald is only a bald, and the silence is just silence. The laurel grew back green over the place where I burned my own name back into the dirt. And somewhere out there, right now, on some other mountain, a stranger's phone is rolling, and they have no idea what they're about to prove.